Again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather on the 22nd day of February 2022. Up first, hazardous weather graphic and eastern North Slope, Eastern Brooks Range. Winter weather advisory remains out until midnight tonight for snow and wind gusting to 35 miles an hour, so that'll create with the snow, blowing snow, which will reduce visibilities to a half mile or less at times. And then by midnight and after, conditions will improve and the advisory will end, or if it doesn't, then they'll kick it out longer. And also let's see, down to the south there, lower Yukon River on out to the Yukon Delta. Winter weather advisory out, and that's through Wednesday, and that's for several inches of snow mixed in with freezing rain, especially over the Yukon Delta with the freezing rain. Some of that could move into the Kuskokwim Valley as well, up toward or into the lower Yukon River Valley, not the Kuskokwim Valley, into the lower Yukon River Valley there, Grayling, those areas. And that's out through tomorrow for snow with freezing rain possibly at times across the entire area. And then off to the east there, winter storm warning for the north coast of the Panhandle. This includes Sitka and actually extends down to Port Alexander and back up to Yakutat. That's heavy snow warning out for tonight, actually until about 9 p.m. this evening for Yakutat, but then all night for farther down the coastline. That's for 5 to 9 inches of snow expected to fall across those areas. And satellite imagery showing moisture kind of rotating down into the southeast coast there, the weakening front, not all that strong. Not a lot of precipitation occurred over the southeast coast today. Temperatures afternoon rising to near freezing, and actually along the coast, Sitka rising up to around 40. Colder back up toward Yakutat where they saw anywhere from 4 to 6 inches of snow. And also that system across the Kuskokwim Valley, snow ending from west to east, as you can see on the satellite imagery there. 6 to 8 inches of snow fell at Nikolai and 4 to 8 inches in McGrath. That was in the 12-hour period ending at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Otherwise, 2 to 4 inches fell over at Nenana, with 3 to 6 inches of snowfall in the upper Chena area. Again, widespread area of snow up over interior Alaska, all the way up to the Arctic coast there, but ending from west to east and improving, drying out back to the west and southwest. But southeast flow on the increase there, that front to the west, we'll see tonight, low pressure forms along that frontal boundary and moves to west of Nikolsky. That'll kick the winds up. Could see winds gusting 40 to 60 miles an hour there for Nikolsky, and lesser wind for the Unalaska Island area. But a tight gradient, that's good for possible gusts to 55 miles an hour, Cold Bay from the southeast. Rain heavy at times on the Pacific side of the peninsula. A good shot of moisture with a trough there on those southeast winds increasing, moving all the way up to St. Lawrence Island. Look for mostly rain to develop over the Yukon or over the Kuskokwim Delta, again with that freezing rain zone lining up over the lower Yukon River Valley on out to the Yukon Delta, with several inches of snow expected to fall as the next surge of moisture comes up from the south and southeast. Otherwise, some of that moisture will spill into southern Cook Inlet in the form of rain or snow showers, but amounts will be light. Look for a general increase in the cloudiness later tonight over the Kenai Peninsula on up to Cook Inlet and the Matanuska Valley, Susitna Valley, but staying dry with clearing over the northern Susitna Valley up into the Tanana Valley and the Yukon Flats. Copper River Basin drying out, Arctic high pressure over in the Yukon, and that's going to keep cold air flowing into the northern panhandle, but that weakening trough, look for snow mostly along the north coast. Areas of light snow into the southern southeast coast. Nothing really all that significant occurring there. Snow and blowing snow, again with that winter weather advisory out tonight due to that trough cutting across the eastern Arctic coast and North Slope areas. And for tomorrow, that kicks off to the east, so conditions improve dramatically there for the Arctic coast. Just some scattered variable clouds left behind. Mostly clear again north of the Alaska Range. Tanana Valley, see a few clouds, but mostly clear up across the Yukon Flats. Snow and blowing snow developing over the Kobuk-Selawik Valley areas on out toward Kotzebue. Northern Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, and the northwest coast with tightening gradient there. Same thing, St. Lawrence Island, some blowing and drifting snow and additional snow likely. And mixed precipitation, warm air pushing slowly northward though, but the Yukon Delta is still in that snow rain zone. Freezing rain possibly there through the afternoon for the lower Yukon River Valley. Farther up the river, mostly in the form of snow, becomes quite light by the time you reach the central interior. Mixed moisture moving back into the Kenai Peninsula and mostly western Cook Inlet, western Susitna Valley, but there are some flurries possible over into the Copper River Basin. Still that trough weakening off the coast there, having trouble pushing into the Arctic high up over the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, but starts to dry out again over the northern panhandle. Some rain and snow showers, Yakutat down along the coastline, snow showers over the inside waters. Rain and wind, Kodiak Island, temperatures in the lower 40s. Rain, wind for the Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, with again highs 40 to 45. Rain and snow showers for the Fox Islands and the Central Aleutians. And that snow will be higher elevations there are the islands, otherwise rain at sea level. Rain for the Pribilofs, gusty southeast winds as that front tries to push by the area there by tomorrow afternoon. And for Thursday, front reaches the coastline, a weakened front, but south-southeast winds on the increase again. South-central Alaska, keeping temperatures mild. Rain, moderate to heavy at times, Kodiak Island. Mixture of precipitation out all the way up to the Seward Peninsula. Maybe even the northwest coast could see some mixed precipitation. Temperatures trying to push above freezing. Kivalina up to Cape Lisburn, but western Brooks Range, western North Slope, western Arctic coast, snow and blowing snow developing with increasing winds. Areas of snow into the central Brooks Range becomes more showery. Eastern North Slope, eastern Arctic coast should be dry. And the Panhandle, chance of rain and snow showers, central and north coast, otherwise dry off to the east there. And surges of moisture continue to move from south-southeast to north-northwest right into the North Gulf Coast. And that's going to keep it mild and wet there, and very unsettled out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians with several complex low centers out there. So don't look for a lot of clearing, but lower flying conditions, rain and snow likely each period here for the next couple of days. And for lows tonight, low below zero, eastern interior, 1 below Fort Yukon, 8 below at Arctic Village, and 5 to 10 below for the western Arctic coast, but above zero on the east side. And lows teens for the Noatak Valley, Kobuk Valley, 20s, mid to upper 20s for the southwest interior, lower 30s for Bristol Bay, mid to upper 30s for the lows for the Alaska Peninsula, mid 30s in the Aleutians, and teens and upper 20s, northern panhandle, lower 30s out toward the south coast, and 20 to 30 for south central Alaska. Highs tomorrow, Homer, 40 to 45, same thing for Kodiak, Bristol Bay, mid 40s for Unalaska. Mid to upper 30s, Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, and mid 30s forecast high for Nome. Otherwise, 25 to 30 again in the central Tanana Valley. Everyone above zero except the central western Arctic coast. And the Panhandle, highs lower 30s to lower 40s. Followed by lows in the 20s, mostly for the southeast coast for Thursday morning. And lows in the teens for the Copper River Basin, teens above zero. Lower 30s, staying above freezing for the southern Kuskokwim Valley, Yukon Kuskokwim Delta. 30 to 35, 35 to 40 for the overnight lows for Bristol Bay, and same thing for Kodiak Island, mid 30s for the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians, 30 for the Pribilofs, and lows 15 to 20 below, or 10 to 20 below for the central and eastern Arctic coast. That'll be followed by highs staying below zero, but not too far below from the central Arctic coast eastward to Barter Island, Kaktovik, lower 30s showing up, trying to bust the freeze mark there from Noatak to Ambler, and highs in the lower 40s for the southern Kuskokwim Valley, and mid to upper 30s south central Alaska, mid 40s Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, and mid 30s lower 40s for the Pan.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather for Wednesday morning, some VFR for the central Arctic coast, marginal VFR on the east side, North Slope marginal, south of the Brooks Range IFR, south of the Alaska Range, Some VFR, marginal VFR, and IFR scattered across southern Alaska down into Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Delta. IFR solidly entrenched over the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound, right on across all the Bering Sea, all of the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, eastward across the southern Gulf of Alaska, and across the Panhandle, marginal VFR, North Gulf Coast, Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet. And for the afternoon, we've got VFR for the Arctic coast, marginal VFR for the Brooks Range, with some scattered IFR as well. Mostly VFR in the interior, especially along the Kuskokwim River, Yukon River Valley areas, and then IFR along the southwest coast. And covering the Bering Sea, but retreating northward now, north of the Aleutians. Marginal VFR for the Aleutian Chain on Alaska Island, IFR still, and Alaska Peninsula on the south side, IFR, Kodiak Island, IFR, Kamishak Bay, and along the southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula, up toward western Prince William Sound, improving over the Panhandle, VFR north, marginal VFR with some IFR to the south. And for Thursday morning, IFR there over the Yukon Flats to the southeastern Brooks Range, otherwise marginal VFR either side of the Brooks Range, VFR for the Arctic coast, IFR northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island to St. Paul and St. George, marginal VFR shimmying at 2 eastward to the Fox Islands, and you get into the IFR, Nikolsky, Dutch Harbor on Alaska, the Alaska Peninsula. Zone of IFR there, Togiak Bay and around Dillingham, right into the southwest mountains, southern Kuskokwim Valley, northern Kuskokwim Valley, VFR into the greater Fairbanks area, Tanana as well, and areas of marginal VFR, south central Alaska, and the Copper River Basin with IFR, Prince William Sound, southern Kenai Peninsula, Kamishak, Kachemak Bay, possibly, definitely for Seldovia, Homer right on the edge, and IFR for the Panhandle. That becomes marginal for the southeast coast Thursday afternoon as the IFR kind of retreats off the coast. IFR, though, holds over Prince William Sound to Cape St. Elias, southern Kenai Peninsula. No change, southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, Kodiak Island, still IFR, as well as the northern Bering Sea from the Pribilofs up to the Bering Strait. Marginal VFR southwest Bering, and from Unmak Island westward to the Komodorskis. Pretty good VFR in the interior, and also for the North Slope and the Arctic coast, some marginal VFR for the central western Brooks Range and the lower Yukon River Valley. Anaktuvik, IFR. Adigan, marginal. Lake Clark and Merrill, look for marginal VFR. Rainy, marginal. Windy, VFR. Isabel, marginal VFR, trending better through the day. VFR the entire day from Antasta. Tanita, occasionally marginal. Portage, mostly marginal. Chilkoot and White, VFR, becoming marginal VFR later in the afternoon. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet across southern Alaska, and then 2 to 6,000 feet there, Kodiak Island, southwest interior areas, and off the southeast coast. Some icing potential of the considerable moderate variety sliding into the central and southern Panhandle, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, light to isolated moderate icing over much of the central northern Bering Sea, southwest interior areas, another batch pushing into the western Aleutians. Jet stream, southeast flow between the upper level ridge over southern Alaska and the upper level low west of Shimia, so 125 knot southeast jet there across the central Bering Sea. West-northwest 75 across the eastern North Slope. And coming down to 9,000 feet, south-southeast winds 65 to 70 knots from the Kuskokwim Delta out into the northern Bering Sea, southwest 40 for the central Aleutians. And for the 3,000-foot winds, southeast 70 knots there right across northeast Bristol Bay and southern Kuskokwim Valley, as well as pretty windy conditions for the southwest coastal areas. Otherwise, 40 to 50 knots south-southwest winds over the central Bering Sea, light elsewhere. Turbulence, widespread, considerable moderate chop. Bering Strait, western Seward Peninsula, all the southwest interior. Aleutian Range, southern Alaska Range to Kodiak Island, including Bristol Bay. Pretty smooth off to the east and north.
So that Galena flood back in 2013 was at the intersection of weather and climate. Rick, I often get questions about the difference between weather and climate. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, that's a really good question, John. One of the analogies that I like to use, the wardrobe analogy. So in my closet, in my dresser, I've got clothes appropriate for 90-degree weather and 50 below weather. That's the climate part of my wardrobe. But what I'm going to put on today, am I going to wear my Hawaiian shirt because it's going to be a hot July day, or am I going to wear my bunny boots because it's going to be 50 below? That's the weather part of my wardrobe.
You know, there's another interesting analogy. I've heard it said that climate is like your personality, whereas weather is like the mood you're in today. It's like that old John Denver song. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones. That's how weather works.
Of course, it's really a continuous range. Just as the Galena ice jam flooding was the result of a weather event, that ice jam, up against that cold spring, a climate event. So too with less impactful events. For instance, a daily record high temperature is a weather event, one day's high. But we put that in a climate context, say comparing to a century or more of individual temperatures on a given date.
So these extreme events like record high temperatures also happen on the seasonal time scale. Just in the last few years, we've had what was called a marine heat wave in the waters south of Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. The water temperatures in that area set new records in 2015 and 2016.
And most Alaskans are acutely aware that big wildfire seasons are becoming more and more common, most recently in 2015. And the frequency of million-acre seasons has doubled since the early 1990s.
Just this past winter, we had another event in the Bering Sea. The ice extent in the Bering was lower than it had ever been in the last 150 years. That's about as far back as the good records go. There'd never been another year like this one in the Bering with so little sea ice. That had major impacts on the communities along the west coast and the northwest coast.
So, John, what have you been hearing from folks around town about these kind of climate extremes?
I've heard from a number of people who've been here a long time that winters just aren't what they used to be. The average temperatures are higher than they were back in the 1960s and 1970s, and we just don't get the extreme cold days, the days down in the minus 50s or even the minus 60s that we used to experience in Fairbanks back in the, say, the 1960s, 1970s, and even into the 1980s.
Well, and it's not just winter either. 2016 and 2017, the summers brought unusually muggy, humid weather to Fairbanks. We're not used to thinking of that in interior Alaska, but record high humidities during the summer months. As in the winter, we've had a significant increase in freezing rain events, since about 2000. So much so that DOT has changed their road treatment strategy, and now we have the school district building in winter rain days into the calendar. And of course, we all need good weather forecasts for these high impact weather events.
We know, though, that weather forecasts are sometimes wrong just 3 or 4 days in advance. So if these weather forecasts and the models they're based on can't pick up events like freezing rain 3 or 4 days ahead, how can we believe what they say about climate for the future?
Well, that's a really good question, John. And I think the important thing to remember is that parts of the system are predictable.
So climate models can't give you weather for particular days or even for particular months or years. They actually predict averages. These are averages over periods of a decade or two, or even averages over periods of several years. So they don't give us the month-to-month information that we might want. What are they telling us about the future, though?
Well, these climate models are telling us on the decades-long time frames that warmer winters are going to become more common. We're going to have more frequent, very low sea ice years with late freeze up and early meltout. And the same will be true on Alaskan rivers. We'll have more frequent seasons when freeze up is late and break up is early.
One of the other common threads in these climate model predictions is that heavy rain events and heavy snow events will become more common in the future. That's actually a prediction that the models make for mid-latitudes as well as for high latitudes in areas like Alaska. So we can expect the heavy downpours to become heavier and the heavy winter snows to become heavier than we've been used to. They're also predicting more frequent freezing rain events, getting back to what you talked about earlier. These events that might have happened just once every year or two in the past could actually end up happening several times in a winter in the future, according to the climate models.
And it is important to remember that even in a warming world, there are still going to be seasons and years that are colder than the average, but these cold seasons will become less and less common. So, John, maybe I don't need to have those bunny boots in my closet anymore?
Well, at least you won't need to wear them as often as you did in the past.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Look for south to southeast winds 15 knots on the south coast of the Panhandle. Seas at about 8 feet. Otherwise, on the north coast, winds will be southeast at 20 knots, seas 10 feet. Central, southern, inner channels areas, inside waters, southeast winds 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Lincoln Glacier Bay, northern inside waters, north winds at 15 knots with 3-foot seas. Outlook for Wednesday, outlook for Thursday. Gale warnings. Next front approaches the coastline and winds come up to southeast 35 to mostly 40 knots along the entire stretch of the coastline. Seas building 16 to 18 feet. And small craft advisories developing for Clarence Strait throughout the day for winds increasing from the southeast to 25 knots. Seas building to 6 feet. And for Stevens Passage and Lynn Canal, winds will be southeast of 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Prince William Sound, Wednesday, northeast winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet. Small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast, east winds 25 to 30 knots with 8-foot seas. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, winds will be east 45 knots, seas 13 feet. Gale warnings for southern Cook Inlet, northeast winds 35 knots, seas 9 feet. And brisk wind advisories for northern Cook Inlet, winds will be northeast at 25. Even stronger winds in store for Cook Inlet on Thursday. Gale warning south of the Forelands for east winds at 40 knots, seas 11 feet. Brisk wind advisories northern Cook Inlet, northeast at 30 knots. And gales continue for Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, winds right out of the east at 45 knots. Storm warnings for the North Gulf Coast, southeast winds 50 knots. Gale warnings for Prince William Sound, east winds 35 knots with 9-foot seas. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, east to southeast winds 30 to 35 knots, seas 12 feet. And from Sitkinak to Cape Sarachev, southeast winds 30 knots, 13-foot seas. Gale warnings on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula for southeast winds at 35 knots with 8-foot seas. And Bristol Bay, east winds at 40 knots with seas at 6 feet. And for Thursday, Bristol Bay comes down to 30 knots from the east for the winds there. Alaska Peninsula, lighter winds in the forecast from the southeast at 20 knots. And for Kodiak Island, full gales, east-southeast winds 40 knots, seas 14 feet. On Alaska Island, south to southeast winds 30 to 40 knots for the day Wednesday. Unmak Island, west-southwest 25 to 30 knots. Adak, lighter winds there, south at 20. Same thing for Amchitka Island, but seas up to 20 feet. And for Kiska to Shimia, southeast winds 15 knots. And for the Thursday outlook, Actually, from Atka Island all the way to Shemya, winds will be southwest of 25 knots with 15-foot seas. And for the Fox Islands, south winds 25 knots with seas running 8 to 17 feet. Gale warnings for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island on Wednesday, southeast winds 40 knots. Gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew Island, east winds 35 knots. Brisk wind advisories for the Yukon Delta coast and Norton Sound for east winds at 30 knots. Southeast winds 30 knots with 12-foot seas for the Pribilofs. And for Thursday, Pribilofs, small craft advisory, southeast 30 knots. Same thing for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, southeast winds 25 knots. And 30 knot southeast winds St. Lawrence Island, and 20 knot winds for the northern Bering Sea from the east. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast for Wednesday, brisk wind advisories, west winds 25 knots, central coast west at 20, west side north at 15, and then brisk wind advisories from Cape Beaufort to Wales for northeast winds at 25 knots. Even stronger winds in the forecast for all of the Arctic coast, from Wales to Cape Thompson, southeast winds 30 knots, Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, east winds at 30 knots, gale warnings for the western Arctic coast, east at 35, and brisk wind advisories for the central and east side, winds 20 to 30 knots right out of the east. For tonight, look for a passing area of snow as a trough scoots eastward along the Arctic coast and flurries over the north slope. Snow showers will extend down into the northern Koyukuk, Kobuk Valley areas and some light snow on the northwest coast. Wind, rain, mild temperatures push northward and right in on those southeast winds there ahead of that frontal system with low approaching the Fox Islands, and snow tapers off for the eastern North Gulf coast but increases over the remainder of the Panhandle. And for Wednesday, rain heavy at times, gusty winds Kodiak Island, wet, mild, and windy over the southwest interior, especially Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula. That pattern continues into Thursday as well. Otherwise, look for not too bad conditions with increasing moisture on the north coast of the Panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.